Hi everybody. So welcome to episode 12 of Teh Tarik with Walid, and we are doing something slightly different today. We are going to have a discussion on the topic Chinese privilege. By the way, for those who are online, please let me know if you can hear me, and if you have any comments or any questions you have for myself or Melin, feel free to type them. And before I begin, I just wanted to say that I am not the first person to introduce the term Chinese privilege. Me and my co-author and I, Dr. Humaira Zainal, we are not the first person. So we are really building on the works of people like Alfian Sa'ad and Sangeeta Tanapal and Haider Zaharuddin. And we are building on the foundations that they have laid. So that's the first thing. I just wanted to say that we are acknowledging our gratitude towards the prior works before us. So we don't want to pretend as if we are the ones who introduced the term. Secondly is, whatever Humaira and I wrote in the article that some of you may have read, we stand by that. But whatever happens today is solely my responsibility. Okay, so these words are completely mine, and Humaira should not be held liable for whatever I say here today. Alright, so this topic obviously has gained a lot of traction in the past couple of weeks especially, and one of the reasons why is because of our guest today, Melin Fung, and she was a speaker at the IPS Singapore Perspectives Forum, and she essentially was not too pleased with the usage of the term Chinese privilege, shall we put it that way, and she will explain herself later. So I thought we should have her on and then have a discussion, because we shouldn't be discussing only with people we agreed with. Otherwise, I would only be talking to myself all the time, which I am perfectly capable of doing, but it wouldn't move the discourse anywhere. So I think it's quite important for us to listen to people that we disagree with as well. And without further ado, maybe you can send the request, Melin. Hi, hi,
Hello.
hi, Melin. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Hi. Right. So, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. I think. Oh, sorry. I think your video is not working, Melin. I think there's something wrong with the connection. Can you resend the video? Can you resend the request, Melin? Oh, there's a question by my Sarah. Are there plans to invite Professor Daniel Goh and Dr. Terence Chong, since their replies sparked this? Well, I have invited them, and I think Professor Daniel Goh initially said yes, but subsequently something happened, and hopefully I will get them on. So the offer is on the table. Anytime they want to come on, I'm more than happy to have them on. So let's try this again.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you. I really wanted to commend you first and foremost for your willingness to come on, and you immediately said yes. So I really appreciate that. So let's get to it. Let's discuss the term Chinese privilege. And maybe my first question to you is, let me do the preamble first, maybe, right? So when I heard what you said, and I was a bit, I guess I was a bit concerned at some point, because you were saying that how we should be stomping on the idea, and I'm not sure whether ideas should be stomped on. And for me, when we operate in the marketplace of ideas, we should be debating and refuting and discussing and not stomped on. But maybe hyperbole aside, what is your stance on Chinese privilege? So mine is quite clear that, first of all, I think it is the unearned advantages or power that a Chinese person derives from being the majority race, partly, and also because of mostly, but partly because of other factors as well in Singapore. in spite of other identities that person may have. Right? So that's my definition, and I think it's quite uncontroversial to suggest that there is Chinese privilege in Singapore. So I just wanted you to respond, and then we can take the discussion from there. By the way, this is the most well-attended episode since episode 2. So
Wow.
I wonder why. I
Great.
wonder why.
Well, you have
Yes.
really touched a nerve. First of all, I want to say that I have not lived in Singapore since 1974, and yet I call myself a Singaporean. So I'm not so familiar with the political use of the term Chinese privilege in Singapore. And I read your article, and so all of these are nuances that I haven't lived with. I want to have this discussion, but I think it's very important to talk about terms such as Chinese privilege. And I also am glad for the chance to explain what I said in a way that makes it clearer.
Sure.
For example, just now you just said, Malin says you should stomp on the term Chinese privilege. I would say that my words was that if Lee Kuan Yew was here, he would have stomped on it.
And you said justifiably so, right?
Uh,
You added, you
yes,
added justifiably so. So I assume that part is your,
yes.
that is your opinion.
Yes, it is, and
Yeah,
I would like the chance to.
Sure. Yeah, carry on.
Right,
That's
right.
That's why. Yeah. That's
Okay.
why we have.
I asked for the topic of this to be called digital tsunami and the term Chinese privilege, because I think that's really why we have to be very careful about the use of the term. The digital tsunami means that underlying potential areas of contention within any society can actually be exploited by others outside for their own purposes that may not have to do with the factors of what's going on inside a country. We have seen that, and I'm living it here in the United States. Since you invited me, we had the January 6th storming of the Capitol. This is where it was really, really shocking for people in the United States who weren't close to those issues, and the use of social media and internet platforms really is bringing new factors into how people relate to each other, and also how divisions can be exploited. So I really am worried about the use of the term Chinese privilege. For example, in your paper, you very, very carefully define there's all kinds of reasons why you can't translate white privilege to Chinese privilege.
Right.
The trouble is that's in an academic paper where you said it. But if you just say it out in the open, in the Straits Times, where you aren't peeling apart the nuances, that you can't just say Chinese privilege equates to white privilege, then it becomes a little tricky.
Right.
And I think it's really bringing forward the fact that in Singapore, the whole discussion about race has been, in fact, tamped down. And I'd like to say, I grew up, I was there in 1965. I was 9 years old at independence. The riots and what happened in Indonesia, all of those things were part of my own growing up. And to some degree, I think about it as not crying fire in a crowded theater, that in those days, in those times, it was very, very tricky to stir up racial tensions because they were already there, and there were power plays going on, powerful people using the mood of the crowd to advance their pieces, that whatever their agenda was. And those were the days where it was very tricky. It may seem very safe still in Singapore, but in the US, it does not feel safe. the whole the division that's happening in the United States. You know, all of that was under the surface, and it's now coming up, right? People are really seeing white supremacy and Black Lives Matter. There's many, many,
Sure.
many things that are going on. So
Sure. So yeah. So I mean, there's a lot there to unpack, right? So I understand the concern that the worry is the discussion is not nuanced, right? I completely get that because not everything is Chinese privilege, in my opinion, right? But why is the solution to do away with the term? Why is the solution to just dismiss the term immediately? Why is the solution not, let's have a nuanced discussion? And
let's
this
have
is,
it. I actually agree. I sorry to interrupt you.
sure.
But it's the term that has so much packaged inside it.
Okay, so
Before you,
sure. So maybe I'll give a few examples, and then you tell me if it's not Chinese privilege, what is the term you prefer to describe the phenomenon?
okay.
So when DPM Heng and even PM Lee has said before that SM Taman cannot be prime minister, or because the population or the older Chinese especially is not ready for a non-Chinese prime minister, what do you call that? What term would you introduce to describe that phenomenon?
Politics.
Right, but politics. Why is that a better term to encapsulate what is going on, right? Because when you say politics, there are so many things that come under the banner of politics, right? But there is a specific racial element there, right? And I'm not even saying that's racism. You're right, because I think PM Lee and DPM Heng are onto something, that maybe there are some people who are uncomfortable with a non-Chinese prime minister, right? Now, whether those sentiments should be accepted is a different matter, but I think they are not right. They are not wrong on the facts, right? But how do you describe that phenomenon? The fact that SM Taman, even though he is, many people say, and I believe as well, he's clearly more than qualified, but he cannot be because of his race. Could you give us a better term then to describe the phenomenon?
I can't, because this whole situation of the politics inside Singapore, I tried to say before we set up this time that I'm not equipped to kind of come up with terms for Singapore,
Sure,
what's going
sure,
on in Singapore, because I don't live there, and
sure.
you know, it's
Right.
so yeah, I think that the term Chinese privilege brings up that you're advantaged in some way because of
Yes.
some inherent thing.
Yeah.
So I could say you are male privilege, right? Because
And I would absolutely agree with you.
yeah, and so
And I wouldn't dismiss the concerns of
no,
people or females who raise that term.
yeah.
I would say let's have a nuanced discussion, but I wouldn't say, oh, there is no such thing.
Well, I'm not saying there's no such thing. I live with, you know, the fact that some people are advantaged because of their sex or their who their parents
Right.
were.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
there's lots
Right.
of different advantages. I think the term privilege brings a certain sense of aggression that uh, it's unjust, unfair, and it needs to be fixed right away.
Right.
Right. And so
yeah.
what I'm saying is that not every ill can be fixed right away. And sometimes if you stir up people's you know, get upset about this sense, and you get a lot of people stirred up about it, then there's the possibility that it just moves into just rage, you know. And I think at this time of the digital tsunami, and would like a chance to say a little bit about the dangers of this digital
Sure.
tsunami.
Carry on. Yeah.
At the time of the digital tsunami, whatever rage there is or passion has a potential of being used for power plays, for advantage, for Singapore itself is a small country in a region of many different races. And I think it's not to the benefit of anyone to bring up the racial issues, that we are far better to say, how can we come together to collaborate to make the ASEAN region be the wonderful, thriving region it could be. I don't know if you know, but in 2002, I was one of the overseas Singaporeans who raised the issue that Singapore should pay attention to ASEAN, that ASEAN was going to be a rising economic region, and Singapore's future was completely tied to ASEAN. And we were lucky enough, as overseas Singaporeans, to be listened to by the cabinet. And so they went ahead. Now ASEAN is very important to MFA, and
Right.
everybody talks about ASEAN. But
Right.
back in 2002, that wasn't the case, and
Right.
we
So
raised
I
it.
think let's explore that a little, right?
Yeah.
So in 2002, that wasn't a priority, but the more people discussed it, the more it entered the public discourse,
Yes.
and people accepted it. Why
Yeah.
can't we apply the same for Chinese privilege?
So
The concept.
I don't mind using the term advantage of different aspects, but
So you
the
would
term
prefer
privilege
Chinese advantage over Chinese privilege, or
or male advantage, the trouble about the word privilege is it has so much echo of the term white privilege. And the term white privilege came about in the United States, where there's a history of slavery, segregation,
so
the Civil
I
War.
understand. I
We
understand that,
just don't have that.
but I'm not sure whether many people are saying we should adopt the terms uncritically. We can use that for our first of all, I just want to say I'm not sure how the term using the term Chinese privilege is aggressive or inciting, because by the way, whether we use the terms or not, people are talking about it. Is a reality for many people. And by the way, I don't purport to speak for minorities. I cannot speak for minorities. I can only speak for myself, and I have done from the perspective of a researcher who has talked to many people about this, and also from looking at what has been said and done in this country, right? So whether we use the term, I think it's we cannot pretend that people are not discussing it and people are not using the term, or this is a live reality for many people, right? So that's the first thing. And second thing, right? Just because it is used in America in a particular way doesn't mean we cannot use the term in Singapore and adapt it to our context, right? I believe you are.
Actually, you say right. I don't agree with that.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
maybe I can give you an example.
No, can I come back?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I give you an example, and then you can respond to that. So I believe you are a fan of secularism, right, in Singapore?
I actually not sure if I really understand the way you mean it, the term.
No. I'm just saying the term.
Scientist.
No. But that's my point. You see, our lexicon, our political lexicon, our political realities, we adopt terms from the West all the time.
Of course.
Democracy, multiculturalism, secularism, and all of these are non-issues. Somehow, when it comes to Chinese privilege, we cannot adopt it because this is a Western concept.
No. I
Carry on.
Definitely disagree. And I want to go back to the founding of Singapore. At the time of the founding of Singapore, there was really around the world, everywhere, this idea that Western foreign investment meant going back to colonialism. So India, for example, didn't allow foreign investment unless I think a certain amount was given to the state. And so what I think happened in Singapore is plotting our own path, right? Which is not just saying, oh, India says, foreign investment is bad, therefore we bring it over. Singapore thinks foreign investment. In fact, it was Singapore's willingness to plot its own path forward that allowed Singapore to be successful, to say we can bring in foreign investment and we can make it work for us. And so I think that of course we should bring in what works and not bring in what doesn't work. And I think what I'm saying is that I'm not sure, in fact, I'm really sure the term Chinese privilege doesn't work for Singapore, because what we want to do is plot our own path through this whole very tricky area of race. And when you use a term that's developed in a completely different context, but you don't know and can't control how the people listening to you are going to take it, and you also can't control how other people with other agendas might take your words and make it.
Sure, I mean, I understand that. I understand that there will be people with different agendas trying to exploit. That's even if you use the term which you suggested, Chinese advantage. I don't see how that negates those 2 points, right? Whether it's less aggressive or whether it's going to be taken advantage of. So it seems to me that you are not disagreeing with the concept, but the terminology, or am I misunderstanding?
I'm disagreeing about the dialogue focusing on one aspect. It's almost like there's a whole body and we are talking about the left hand only, and then we are not talking about the
What
right.
is that whole body, and what are the right hands? What are the feet? What are the head?
Okay. So I am not really into Singapore politics because I haven't lived there. Okay. But what I am into is what's going to happen in the world in the next 10 to 20 years. And that this idea of what digital technology can do is starting to happen everywhere. And Singapore is a leading country, a leading digital economy. And there is tremendous potential for Singapore to make a big difference in the world. And what I would like to see is the people of Singapore, regardless of race, language, or religion, coming together to move the advantage forward rather than trying to say, oh, the pie is this limited, let's work out how previous advantage and future advantage can split the current pie. I'd rather us all work on expanding the pie, and the growth opportunity for Singapore, for me, is really great. We have literally the best health system, the best education
those
system.
are not. So I understand all of that, and I understand what you said during the forum as well. You know, so 2 things, right? One is I always compare Singapore to what Singapore can be, not just how Singapore is better than the others. I compare Singapore to its absolute best. And just because we are doing very well doesn't mean we should not be talking about the areas where we are not doing so well in, right? So I think it seems like a motherhood statement when people say, oh, we must all move together. Of course, but we must also acknowledge that there are certain advantages, if we don't want to use the word privilege, the certain advantages. And if we are against the term Chinese privilege because it's an American term in origin, then shouldn't the right thing to do would be to suggest an alternative term, an indigenous term that would make people happier, and then we can move on and talk about the issues because the concept, you know, when I was explaining this to my parents, my parents are not educated, I was talking to them about Chinese privilege, right? And they were looking at me as if I was some idiot. Why do you need a new term for this? Everybody knows, every minority, and this is what it is. Every minority knows this in Singapore. So it's still it's a strange thing when people are going after the term rather than the concept, because for me that's a little bit of a red herring. I'm willing to accept whatever term you suggest, as long as we agree on the contents of the term.
So I guess the tricky thing for me is using terms which may get the different races pitted against each other. And I think, just like you are a man and I am a woman, that, you know, you are a very enlightened man. And so when I say you have a male advantage, you say, yes, I do. But in fact, there are many men who say, what are you talking about? Women have taking my jobs and so on.
And the solution would be to convince and debate with those men, right?
Actually, I want to say it. Some people will not be convinced right away, but I do agree that the solution is more discussion. Okay. And I think in Singapore's sort of debate has got so not compassionate, and not thinking about caring for each other. And so I want more dialogue, but I would like the dialogue to be more loving and compassionate
Uh,
about how do
sorry,
we move forward in a
sorry,
way.
Malin. Do you think the when you said Lee Kuan Yew would storm on the idea and justifiably so, do you think that was a compassionate way of
No.
addressing people's concerns, right? So, is it again? I mean, and by the way, I'm completely fine with that characterization, right? Because if you disagree with the idea, okay, carry on. We can be as forceful as you like, as long as we are
Yeah.
civil. And I think you have been very civil, and I appreciate that. So, I'm saying nobody is saying that, oh, because, okay, if there are people who are saying this, then I am completely against. This is not my understanding of Chinese privilege. The Chinese have been advantaged in every aspect of life. Every single Chinese has been advantaged in every aspect of their lives, which is completely not the argument I'm making.
Mm.
And therefore, we must take this away from them. That's not, that's the second, the solution, right, is the second step. Right now, we cannot even agree on the first part before we get to the solution, right? So I think partly one of the ways to engender more compassion is for us to actually have a listening ear when people are actually saying this. And okay, what are your concerns? Why is that? Why do you use this term, right? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. I would agree with that.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So another thing is I wanted to ask you, since you said you have not lived here since 1974, right?
Yeah.
But your response to the question, right, was quite forceful. You were not hedging, or you were not,
No.
and it seemed to, because this live chat, right, is not going to be covered by Mothership or Straits Times, right? It's not going to get the attention that the IPS forum did, right? So most probably people are going to remember your comments about risks, not from this chat, right? The general public is going to remember it from that forum, right? So if you're unsure about something, right, why did you take such a forceful stance against it before actually investigating or listening to minorities?
Uh, I took the forceful stance because I live here in the United States and I know the way the term white privilege is used. And it made me very, very worried that it would be, the term Chinese privilege would be used in a way that uses this sort of same, that is, I'm living here. There's so much anger. there's so much upset and centuries of suffering really that have happened here. And so that I'm living it in a kind of a real way about the white privilege term. and
Right.
and growing up in Singapore, I just didn't have that. I couldn't see how it could apply,
Right.
not the
Okay.
way I'm living it here. So I spoke as somebody who's been living in the United States for over 30 years.
Right. And I agree. I think the circumstances the blacks are facing nowhere near compared to the minorities in Singapore, right? Nowhere near. But there would be some maybe meeting points in terms of understanding the privilege, right? The unearned advantages, right? So maybe
Oh.
I'll just show you something, right? This is from a children's book. It was in the SG50 babies who were born in 2015 got this. So my son got this, and one of the pages was this. The only Malay character in the book, right, was this Malay lady who's a parking auntie and didn't have a speech, and didn't even have a dialogue there. And when I showed that to many people, right, and then they said, "Oh, the author is not purposely trying to be racist," and I agree. I completely agree. I am sure the author didn't purposely meant to be racist. But it's still troubling nonetheless that the only Malay that could come into your imagination is a parking auntie, right? Um, so I guess these are the types of issues that and I can go on and on. What about SEP schools, right, for instance? And even though I understand, I am actually quite supportive of SEP schools. Many people are not, many minorities are not, but I am quite supportive of SEP schools. I see the need for it. I'm just saying that there is a certain advantage that you get from going to a SEP school that you do not get if you do not go to one.
Yeah. Perhaps we should work on where we agree.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah.
I agree that we need to discuss these issues. I think that the whole world and needs to find ways to talk about the way people are different and the way the current societies have certain groups are advantaged and privileged than others. I think that moving forward, the ability to actually have those discussions in compassionate and constructive ways is the most important to me. And I had a story that I wanted to tell to try
Sure.
to explain. So my daughter, when she went to kindergarten for the first time, the teacher told me she has no fine motor skills. You've been a bad mother. You didn't teach her fine motor skills. And it turned out that you get fine motor skills by using scissors. And I had not let her use scissors at all at home because I was the first time mother. I thought it was dangerous. I made sure she never had scissors. So when she went to school, she couldn't use scissors and she had no fine motor skills. Why am I telling this story? I think that in Singapore, because of the way Singapore started, this conversations about race didn't happen. There was this protective bubble. Now, what is happening
Wait,
now?
can I stop you there? How do you know that didn't happen? How do you know that this concept has only been discussed in the past 6-7 years when the term Chinese privilege was introduced? Because because when I was growing up, race was absolutely, it was integral to every aspect of my life, even when I thought it wasn't, but society always reminded me that it was, whether it's making fun of my skin color or accents or whatever it is, right? So, and minorities always have conversations about this. It's not exactly new, I guess.
No.
If you're saying that minorities do not have these conversations in the same manner that minorities in America have, of course, because the experiences are completely different, right? Even in America, right, the Asian American experience is completely different from the Black experience. Even amongst minorities, there are different experiences, right? But I'm saying that it is not exactly true that minorities have not been discussing it, and it's only that, and it's also a bit, I guess.
No, I'm not saying that.
Sure.
I'm saying that multiracial discussions about it, Chinese people with Malay people, Indian people, and so on, that there's been a chasm of not discussing it.
Right.
I'm not saying it hasn't been discussed, but discussed as a society. The fact that, and I didn't really realize that when I said the words that I did, it would cause this much trouble. So it's the fact that it's the very fact that it's causing this much trouble that's letting me know that, oh, these discussions have not been happening. I come to this just, observing what I can observe. I explained why I was worried about the term, and that was because of my experience of white privilege.
Right.
I said it. I did not expect that it would suddenly light a flame.
Right. Okay.
Right. And so that's why I'm saying we actually need to learn how to have dialogue about these difficult issues. It's not easy, but we also have to have the tools to use it. I like
what are those tools? What are those tools that we can start using and having these discussions in public?
Learning. I think we are ourselves actually demonstrating how we can have respectful and trying to understand what is the other person talking about. Having this exchange of listening and trying to understand the particular areas for each other and to both feel at the end of the conversation that, oh, I learned something I didn't know before. Think about it and reflect on it. And I worry that the conversations try to get too much done too fast. And by doing that, we don't have the time to hear each other out.
So I understand that. So what would be an appropriate timeline, I guess, to discuss this, right? Because this is not the first time, right? We've heard such objections, right? Because the society is not ready. It's another standard one when we do not want to discuss controversial topics. Society is not ready. Or let's have respectful conversations, right? When I think generally conversations are respectful other than Twitter, but nothing's respectful on Twitter anyway. If you go on Twitter, you should expect to not have respectful conversation. But I think generally the conversations on privilege have been quite respectful. And I think that we are having quite a respectful conversation. So what would be an appropriate timeline then? What are the markers? Maybe
Yeah.
not a time where by 2025. Yeah, but what are the markers where society would be ready to discuss this?
I think that all what comes to mind for what happened from my knowledge is it really took a whole generation for tobacco to be, people knew tobacco was dangerous, but it was really by teaching children in kindergarten and so on. And this whole new generation had to come up before really that, it was possible to have the whole tobacco thing go down. So it may be that we have to start teaching in kindergarten about how to talk about these things. And it's not that people don't know how to have respectful conversations. It's just there's so much suffering. There's so much suffering due to, this whole idea of advantage and the difficulties, how you were teased when you were young. There's so much suffering. Some of it cannot be handled at our generation. I'm much older than you, but it's difficult now. How we can help children end up learning to be to truly grow.
I understand that, right? But every time there is a movement to introduce something, there's always a pushback, which is standard. That happens all the time, right? So I see this pushback against the term Chinese
pushback against tobacco education.
Exactly. That's my point. So I'm saying that this is normal, right? This is normal. You expect whenever you introduce a new idea and people to push back, and it plays out in the contestation of ideas, right? And the marketplace of ideas, at least, right? So would you say since that IPS forum and now would anything have changed, or your opinions about, specifically with regard to your opinion about Chinese privilege or Chinese advantage, whatever it is there anything that would have changed, or would you still stick to your guns in terms of how you characterize Chinese privilege?
I think now I understand more the sort of fire that I lit. And I wish I had had more time to say my concern was that the term white privilege is so loaded and it has so much suffering. It's being used in the United States. There's so much suffering that I was really worried.
You see, the thing is, right, the funny thing for me is, right, you said we shouldn't import the term white privilege because it originates from America, right? And then the concerns that you are saying are based on the American context, not the Singaporean context. The violence and the discontentment, the racial aggravations between that's about America, right? That's not Singapore. So aren't you actually guilty of what you are saying? Like, you're importing the problems of those countries and you're putting it in Singapore. And this is what may happen if we use the term Chinese privilege.
I really have to say what triggered me was because I had talked about the health system. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yeah.
That I had been studying the Singapore health system and comparing it to the American health system. And what had worried me was that people were taking arguments from the American health system and bringing it up in the Singapore context. And it didn't apply. And in fact, could have potentially made the Singapore health system more like the American health system, which I really didn't want because it costs, 4 times as much.
But that has nothing to do with Chinese privilege, right? The healthcare system debate. What has that got to do with?
The thing that I saw was that the American cultural, the use of words, the topics and so on, are so strong in the American TV episodes and movies and so on. It comes to Singapore through media,
yeah,
right?
And I guess in a way that's inevitable because of American hegemony, right? And the fact that we are an English-speaking country as well. But again, I don't see the link between healthcare and Chinese privilege specifically, right? Unless you're saying because Singaporeans are importing discussions on healthcare, therefore they will import discussions on white privilege as well.
I worry about that. I do. I think you got
So
it. That's actually why I was
right. Okay. Shouldn't we give more credit to Singaporeans in their abilities to import concepts, distill it, and use it in the Singaporean context?
I'm happy to. I can only give my own reaction. It was an honest reaction at the time.
Sure. And
you
I
are now
appreciate
educating me that there's a much more that I should be. I think discussion is important. I'm looking at the comments here.
Yeah. The comments are unfortunately can be quite brutal sometimes. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that I really appreciate you coming on because you didn't have to. So I appreciate that. And I think there was some consternation on the part of minorities, right? Because it seems like the instinctive reaction, right? The instinctive reaction is to dismiss. And this is the instinctive reaction we get throughout our lives, right? It's very common whenever somebody makes a racial joke, for instance, oh, why are you so sensitive, right? So when that happened at an IPS forum, to no pushback whatsoever, I think that was what really, I don't want to use the word hurt because I really don't want to play victim, but that was really upset a lot of minorities. So I mean, so I would appreciate as well in the comments. I mean, you can criticize her ideas, people. I think we shouldn't criticize her character or personality because again, she agreed to come on, and I fully appreciate it because many people would not. So just one more. Yeah,
like
sure. Carry on. Yeah.
At no point was there ever any feeling on my part that I was trying to hurt minorities.
I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that you were going out of your way to hurt minorities. It's just that the outcome of what was said it seemed a little dismissive to me, as in that was my concern, but you have I think explicated your stance, and your ultimate worry is about Singaporeans using the term uncritically, adopting it, and I think that is a point of agreement between ourselves. I wouldn't want Singaporeans to use the term uncritically as well, and not everything is racism, not everything is Chinese privilege. I think we must be more in a word that was used a lot at the IPS forum. We must be nuanced in our approaches, right? But being nuanced doesn't mean that we do not acknowledge a problem exists, right?
Yeah. And so if I have to have a final thought on this,
sure, carry on.
I think what I hope for and this potential of Singapore in the digital world is to be an example and to be an example of compassionate dialogues about differences and differences in advantage, compassionate in a way that we actually take action to make things so that everyone can participate and realize their potential. That's the dialogue I would like to concentrate on rather than, you know, who's a bad person.
Is there anybody who said that who's a bad person when? I mean, are there any academics who say when we use the term Chinese privilege is about identifying who are bad people or who are?
No, but no academics are doing that. But because of how much suffering that there has been, sometimes, you know, because if you've been hurt and you want to blame somebody, then if you hear, oh, that's the one to blame,
Right,
then you
understand.
can go after
Understand.
that, right?
Right. We mustn't start saying, oh, Chinese people, all Chinese people are like this. Then that would be an example of what you said. So I think that is a point of agreement. So Millie, maybe I'll let you have the last word. Is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I'm very proud of being a Singaporean. I think Singapore has a lot to offer the world, and I look forward to being part of that. Even from afar, I have maintained my Singapore citizenship, and I really believe in Singapore as a great example for the world. And I'm proud of all of you. It's the whole world looks on Singapore as an economic miracle, a social miracle. And so the stronger that we are all together, the more our example can be used by others to actually help, you know, plot their own paths forward, just like Singapore plot its own path.
Right. Thank you so much for coming on and agreeing. It's not the easiest thing to do, right? Coming on and doing this, but I really appreciate it. I think we have shown that we can have a respectful conversation on this
Yes.
without resorting to making police reports, about the issue. So thank you, Melin, and I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.